You're listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in Judges 15. Samson slays 1,000 Philistines with a donkey's jawbone. Judges 15 records another chapter in Samson's turbulent life. The man God raised up to begin delivering Israel from the Philistines continued to display tremendous strength alongside glaring weaknesses. He was empowered by the Spirit of the Lord, and yet he was often motivated by personal revenge. As we read this chapter, we're reminded that God can accomplish his purposes through flawed people. But more importantly, Judges 15 helps us long for a greater deliverer who would accomplish salvation without selfish motives or sinful impulses. And that deliverer is Jesus. The chapter begins shortly after Samson's marriage feast disaster in Judges 14. Samson returned to visit his wife, bringing a young goat as a gift. He intended to resume life with her, but her father informed him that she had been given to another man. Verse 2 says, "I really thought that you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please, take her instead." Samson wasn't interested in a replacement bride. He saw this as a personal betrayal, and he decided to retaliate against the Philistines. He captured 300 foxes, tied them together in pairs with torches fastened between their tails, and he released them into the Philistines' grain fields, their vineyards, and their olive orchards. And the destruction was extensive. What began as a dispute within a marriage escalated into widespread devastation. The Philistines responded by burning Samson's wife and her father to death. Now, ironically, this was the very outcome Samson's wife had tried to avoid when she betrayed him in the previous chapter. But violence gave birth to more violence. And Samson then struck the Philistines hip and thigh with a great blow, before he then retreated to the cleft of the rock of Etam. Throughout Judges, we repeatedly see what life looks like when people do what's right in their own eyes. Samson had been set apart by God, but he wasn't consistently walking in obedience to God. His actions were often driven by wounded pride and personal vengeance. The Philistines then came into Judah demanding that Samson be handed over to them. And instead of standing with Samson, the judge that God had raised up, the men of Judah confronted Samson. In verse 11 we read, "Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, 'Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us?'" Israel had become comfortable with oppression. They feared their enemies more than they trusted God. Samson then agreed to allow the men of Judah to bind him, providing that they wouldn't kill him themselves, and so they tied him with 2 new ropes, and they delivered him to the Philistines. Now, there's something very tragic about this scene, because the people of God willingly handed over the very one that God had raised up to rescue them. As Samson approached the Philistine camp, the enemy shouted in triumph. They assumed the victory was certain, but God wasn't finished. In verse 14, we read this, "When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands." Samson found the fresh jawbone of a donkey and used it to strike down 1,000 Philistine men. Verses 15 and 16 say, "And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put out his hand, and took it, and with it struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, 'With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men.'" This victory wasn't ultimately about Samson's strength. The key details actually found in verse 14. We're told the Spirit of the Lord empowered him. God was fulfilling his promise that Samson would begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. We saw that promise back in Judges 13, verse 5. Well, after the battle, Samson became desperately thirsty. His confidence quickly gave way to dependence. In verse 18 we read, "And he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord and said, 'You have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?'" This is one of the few moments in Samson's story where we see him directly crying out to God. And we see the Lord's answer in verse 19. There it says this, "And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived." The God who provided victory also provided refreshment. Judges often presents leaders who reveal both the need for deliverance and the inadequacy of human saviors. Samson is one of the clearest examples. He was empowered by God, but he was also impulsive, vengeful, and morally compromised. He delivered Israel only partially. But Jesus came as the flawless deliverer. Like Samson, Jesus was handed over by his own people, and yet the similarities quickly give way to profound differences. Samson fought because of personal offense. Jesus gave himself out of sacrificial love. Samson destroyed his enemies through physical force. Jesus conquered sin, death, and Satan through his willing sacrifice on the cross. Samson sought revenge. Jesus prayed in Luke 23:34, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Samson needed continual rescue and continual provision from God. But Jesus is the one who provides living water to all who trust in him. In John 7, verses 37 and 38, Jesus declared that those who come to him will never thirst spiritually because he satisfies the deepest needs of the human heart. Judges 15 reminds us that God works through imperfect people, but imperfect people can never provide perfect salvation. Samson's victories were temporary, but Christ's victory is eternal. When we see Samson's strength mixed with weakness, we should thank God for sending a better judge, a better deliverer, and a better Savior. Jesus doesn't merely begin the work of salvation, he finishes it completely. And because of him, we don't have to remain captive to sin. We can live in the freedom that he purchased for us through his death and resurrection. The story of Samson should leave us grateful for God's patience, amazed by his sovereign purposes, and eager to trust the one who always does what's right. Jesus is the deliverer Israel truly needed, and he's the Savior we need as well. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.